Welcome to Now and Next in Public Affairs, brought to you by Helio Intelligence, the home of de Havilland and Forefront. I'm Jack Talbot, and today we're here to discuss the future of the public affairs profession with my esteemed guest, Dan Hoover from Rolls-Royce. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.
No, not at all. It's good to have you in. Dan, your experience, 15 years, we're talking experience in Parliament, experience at the FSB, experience at Tesco, and now Rolls-Royce. I imagine the profession has changed quite a lot in your time. Can you talk us through a little bit how you've seen it evolved?
Yeah, absolutely. I say a couple of things. Firstly, I think reminding people what public affairs and government relations should be doing, which is adding value to their company or clients, if you're your agency. And government relations, public affairs has a key role to play in strategic counsel, political risk, policy change, regulatory change for the value of whoever you're working for. And with that in mind, I've been quite fortunate because I've had a variety of experiences deliberately to understand how different organisations deploy government relations and public affairs and try and influence change within government. And really interesting seeing the difference between the FTSE 100 and the trade association. We obviously work with our trade associations as well, so we can look at both sides. And also to understand how when I worked in Parliament 15, 16 years ago to what researchers and parliamentarians are doing now, there is a definite shift, definite change, both in terms of the way they do things and also what they're talking about. The policy environment has shifted quite extensively since. So I can definitely give you a few points on how I've seen that change. So interrupt me if I just end up just going into a list.
Ahead.
But the first thing I think is to say is we are seemingly now in an era of permacrisis. And when I started, there were some really big issues. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to belittle tuition fees, but that was the big issue of the day when I was in Parliament. And it's still rumbling on. But you see parliamentarians now, they're grappling with big strategic national, international interests, which is crowding out the space for anybody else that wants to come in and rightly try and influence public policy on their issues. So you look at the way a defence company like ours has a voice, and your competition or people that are competing with us are charities that may capture a proportion of the public interest but isn't the dominant issue of the day. And we've seen that for years now as we go through the series of economic insecurity crises that we're going through. So that alone, from where we were 15, 16 years ago to where we are today, is a very different world in which we're operating in.
It's really interesting. What kind of implications do you think that has for both public affairs as a profession, but also the MPs themselves?
Two things, interconnected. I think for the profession itself, it's got to compete in a world where the demands of government, the demands of Parliament, and now regional authorities, and that's actually another massive shift in where you want to place public affairs or need to place your public affairs capability. You're now playing a key role in a saturated space, effectively to help educate legislators into understanding the issues that they're having to deal with. See, if we take the last election, we saw a huge increase in the number of councillors that became MPs and people that didn't expect to become MPs. And I'm just talking about Parliament here, and some of those new intake are now in ministerial positions who'd never had any experience of global politics, never needed to. And suddenly they're making key decisions on big issues that affect the world and the UK's place in it, not just what happens on your doorstep. And they're grappling with, as we saw with the welfare bill, whatever's in your post bag. So there is a role for looking at helping educate parliamentarians and government on both sides, on how to navigate both issues.
Would you say it's harder now? I imagine it's difficult to compare 10, 15 years ago in terms of the job itself, but from the outside looking in, it certainly appears harder in some respects for MPs to grapple with the challenges and the implications of the geopolitical landscape, as well as have to work on and push through domestic agendas and legislation. It definitely appears to me that has an impact on public affairs. And if you're looking to engage with stakeholders that maybe aren't entirely across relevant policy areas, maybe aren't entirely across the geopolitical landscape and maybe aren't entirely across actually how it is to be an MP and how it is to work through the parliamentary system. It certainly appears harder from the outside looking in.
Yeah, I think you add more strings to your bow if you can offer that almost seamless service without parliamentarians and legislators realising this is happening to a degree. Not necessarily over lobbying, but the number one tool in a public affairs toolbox has to be the how do you make your issue of interest to that person you're trying to influence. And that could be making it hyper-local. That still very much is key. More so now that we're seeing a government and a parliament that's got a huge Labour majority that takes a different focus in terms of that locality than the Conservative administrations of old. So having that view on what are you deploying to make your issue stand out and relevant to that person or people, then you can use those fora to educate at the same time. And guide people through. We've definitely seen an uptick in, if we want to present something, and this is both to Parliament and to government, to come armed with a view on how this could progress. And if we can get some consensus on that early on, fantastic, then you've got more time to put it through. But you spend a bit of time interrogating that process. Does this work? And working through with a select group of people, and that could be parliamentarians, that could be government officials, that could be ministers, and you find a way forward. But you as a company have come up with at least a starter for 10, and you've thought about how this, rather than just having a nebulous idea and hoping it gets picked up somewhere. I think that there isn't space for that anymore. And to your question about how public affairs has changed, the routes and the access to information that legislators, policy influencers have, it's from so many more sources now that you've got to find the right way to navigate that to get your points across and to have that degree of influence as well. So your toolbox has grown massively, but so has your market. So and the saturation of that with your competitors. And so you've still got to navigate all of that, but through all those different routes and using those different toolboxes, you can capture different people through different means that suits them. That does still mean you have to do the legwork in understanding what gets cut through, but it's still an important part of public affairs.
It definitely appears from the conversations that we've explored on this podcast and in private that the skill that was the skill 15 years ago, 5 years ago now, of getting the attention of the right people and having dialogue with them in a way that they understand, that has the intention of having good outcomes, that appears to remain consistent. And I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that it will probably be consistent in 5 years' time, albeit in potentially a slightly more chaotic landscape, as you've described, with the geopolitical angles, with the way domestic politics is going in the UK, as well as various other factors.
Absolutely. And the way we do politics, the method might change, but actually the outcome we're trying to achieve won't change. They'll stay the same. We still want to achieve some degree of influence, and we're still operating in a very human-based environment. So we may go on to talk about the advent of AI and the impact that have on the sector, but you're still looking to connect with somebody in a way that they feel is relevant to them. And that could be through data, that could be through emotion, that could be through their fear they're not going to be re-elected. And you're deploying rudimentary still ways of doing this. You're just using different tools to do it. And those tools are evolving, and that's quite exciting, I think, for the profession, because there are things there that, certainly from industry at times moves faster than politics. And we would like politics to keep up at times because it needs to, especially if you're in a competitive environment, and technology is one of those competitive environments. And the quicker you can get your point across to decision makers, if indeed you need some kind of political change, then the more value that's going to add to your company that is moving at a faster pace.
We'll definitely come back to the AI and the tech angle. I'm really interested, before we get there, just to hear your other thoughts at all on how you think the profession's going to evolve or potentially look in the next 5 years.
So talks about access to information and the routes to access has changed. You can access the people you need to through a variety of methods, and you see people, and I profess I've not done this, but trying to engage with them over TikTok. It used to be you might jump into a direct message on Twitter and X, but now people are doing videos to each other to try and call attention. So you've got that. I think you've also got the fact that when I started out, we didn't have as many elections in such a quick period of time. And just at a national level, the churn of people that are in Parliament, both the Commons and the Lords, and therefore in government, that churn has been quite extensive. And we saw there was a very short time period between a seismic shift in the number of Tory MPs increasing when Boris won his election, to then Labour and then Naval completely reshape the face of and the arithmetic in Parliament. So, and you've got to navigate both the new MPs or new parliamentarians that need to understand the system and bed in, and your own selves on how you navigate that as a company or to inform the debate. So that churn has increased. And that's coupled also with the fact that regional devolution is kicking off, and the last set of elections changing the political landscape with reform coming in. And companies now are questioning several things, including how much do I need to have a focus on regional engagement? We had the devolution debate a while back, and that seems to be settled. And now we're looking at, do we need to have a regional focus? If we need to have a regional focus, who are the parties we need to engage with? And with reform now taking over some quite significant councils and key councils, you're questioning not only do you need to engage at a local level, but now do you need to engage reform nationally because of their performance locally? And you've got one eye to the election going, the next general election, but you're looking at the local, the mayoral elections, the Senate and Holyrood elections, and you're looking now at a different party arithmetic going into that. So in a very short period of time, probably only a third of my career, but you're seeing change at a pace that is rapid. And that pace is both technological and political. And having to deal with that more often than not with less resource, because let's be honest, the economy hasn't been as strong and everyone's costs are going up. So you're either sticking with your public affairs setups or you're reducing them. And that could be reducing your own headcount or reducing your reliance on agencies if you're a company.
There's a lot to unpack there. I think you'll excuse the pun, but I guess 15 years or so ago, there were two main political parties plus the Lib Dems, or you could argue there were three main political parties, wherever you stand. And in the space of 15 years, we've gone from a coalition to a slim Tory government, to a slimmer Tory government, to a big majority Tory government, to a massive landslide Labour victory, and the connotations, the dynamics that come with such a regular churn of stakeholders and then such a high volume of new stakeholders is something that the profession really has to obviously navigate around. And then when you factor in the landscape to that, where the geopolitical world is more unstable and our domestic politics here is where it is. We've seen the rise of the Reform Party. They've obviously gained success in local elections. There's a lot more, I guess, things for public affairs to do now. There are more elections in different geographies and more political parties. To your point, with less resource, that doesn't feel to me like it's going to change that much over the next 5 years. I'd like to think we'll only have one general election in the next 5 years, but never say never. But the landscape around what the UK political situation looks like, I think, is clear.
It's going to be a really interesting perspective if we were having this conversation 2-3 years' time, whether you see companies, clients shift their attention away from Westminster and reduce their Westminster focus in favour of regional focus and have more capability elsewhere in the country. And it begs a question on the relevance of Westminster to achieve your goals. And if you're a transport company or something with quite big infrastructure, the budgets and spending responsibilities of regional authorities and the political influence, which you could use as advocates at a national level on your behalf, could outweigh the need for that focus on Westminster, which could, in just a few years' time, if not already happening, shifting the public affairs landscape in Westminster and how that ecosystem works.
That ecosystem and I guess the status quo could look very different for different people across the sector. Really interesting for us to consider. Any other thoughts at all on what the future of the profession could look like?
Apart from to say that it probably needs to be devolved around the country You also want, and this is a personal gripe for me, and not necessarily a view on the future of the profession because of the change of the profession, but I'd like to see more people understand this profession exists, because over time, and I've certainly seen it. So if we go back to the original question, how has it changed in my 15 years? The makeup of the people that are getting involved in public affairs is shifting, and that's a good thing. Right? The more diverse view you have in your teams, the better. The more diverse party views, the more diverse understanding of different parts of the country, the more understanding of different policy areas. Fantastic, right? Let's create this positive Pandora's box of capability. But I still believe actually you get a very similar person. Of all of that, you're still getting quite a similar person joining the profession. And you like to see that you could spend some time being an engineer and then go and do public affairs, or as you start to think more strategically, how do you bring more of that strategic thinking, those strategic functions into your public affairs? And I talk as a company employee, not as an agency. But within Rolls-Royce, we look at strategy, government relations and communications in the same vein, right? They've all got to operate symbiotically to deliver the change that we want to see. So we draw on those experiences and perspectives. And with a view that, public affairs, government relations should be strategic counsel as well as trying to lobby and have influence. So there is a whole side of the profession that looks internal rather than just external, to say, actually, how am I doing right by the company that I'm working for? How does that function do right by the company to achieve the strategic goals of that company? And that doesn't just bring in a question of, do you know which politician's married to which other politician? That comes is, can you translate the corporate and the political worlds? And can you be a translator, a broker, and someone that adds strategic insight from that perspective when a political perspective is getting more influence in boardrooms than it probably has ever, because the pace of change and influences on the political environment that are affecting business decisions. You only have to look at the conversation around taxation at the moment, levels of inward investment, Trump tariffs, and suddenly you've got overnight something you have to mitigate. And you would hope in an ideal world you prepared for that. And that's government relations has a role to play, public affairs has a role to play to laying that environment internally to best protect and support the business.
Yeah, the dynamic with public affairs internally is something I'm really interested in, because in my experience, we hear really mixed reviews around what the profession can do to demonstrate its value internally. Dan, the aspect of public affairs demonstrating value is something I'm really interested in. We hear a lot about it. I've heard a lot about it in my time working in the sector, about the internal dialogue around demonstrating value. Now, for some people listening to the podcast, having buy-in from C-suite, from executive teams around the value of public affairs and working strategically may not be a problem for them. But there are definitely people out there who work in an environment where they're constantly working or just constantly trying to educate colleagues internally about what they do, the value they bring. Do you have any thoughts looking ahead to the next couple of years about how someone or other professionals in that type of situation, any thoughts on what they can do or things that could potentially work for them?
I think there are a couple of things on that. And it is a constant battle. Right? In Rolls-Royce, I've got to convince engineers to support us engaging with politics, and that's not their day job, and they've got a very hard and stressful day job as it is. And so my job is to convince them that actually working together, we can help the business continue doing what the business wants to do and to grow, and that benefits everybody. And so having that conversation and networking internally and treating your internal stakeholders as importantly, if not more so than your external ones, is critical. And the planning that goes into that should be the same as you would do for an external campaign. You've still got to have a very clear reason to go in there. You've got to have your objectives set. You've got to understand that your plans might change based on what you've learned, and you should be bringing people with you on that journey. So, and that might be amassing a coalition of different types of people within the organisation that can help advocate internally. So that's one side. The other side, I think, is really understanding your strategic goals, both as a company and how that translates into what you want to do to input the political element into that. So for us at Rolls-Royce, we look at where the company wants to go. There might be some programs in there. Government relations is one part of that, right? We see an objective and we go, actually, we can't achieve that objective unless there is change here. That change, who owns the solution? Government. To this one part of the problem. And so we go after that. We identify that, and we don't own the issues as government relations, as public affairs in the organisation. But so we've worked with colleagues to identify what the issues are, what value it adds to the business if we can unlock it. And that gives us our sort of justification for support for the business when you're prioritising 1,000,001 issues internally, and you go, okay, actually we want that, and government relations can help us unlock it. And then we are the support function that delivers something that helps unlock a much bigger issue. Right? This is, as a supporting function, we're there to drive something that benefits the business, adds value. So the second piece of advice would be to really look at actually what your company is going after, be very clear on your objectives, and demonstrate that what you can do can help them achieve that for them. In the same way, if going right back to the start of your career and working for an MP, you're there purely to add value to your MP. You've got a single stakeholder of one. It's just in a corporate, you've got stakeholders of possibly hundreds. If you're clear on that, then you're clear on the goals you're setting yourself as you go and launch your campaigns to influence. So when you go externally, you're absolutely clear on what you're going after, and therefore you can be focused and consistent and go after that. Otherwise, you could spend your time confusing the people you're trying to influence. And we've all, I'm sure, in our careers, sat there in meetings and thought, with people we're trying to influence, and thinking, where's this going? And coming away from it thinking, I'm not sure we landed the points there. But it's much easier if you've got a clear focus.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Really good advice. Thank you. Let's talk about technology. In the last 15 years or so, technology has increased massively. If I think back to 2010-ish and just think about social media, for example, and then think about social media today, it has come a long way. AI is, I say it all the time, AI is coming for everyone in some shape or form. It's going to influence all of our lives. I'm really interested to understand what your thoughts are on tech and public affairs and what kind of impact you think AI is going to have on the profession.
You know, firstly, I've had a pretty short career, like 15 years in the context of my career is a small part of it. And yet when I started out, I was still using Dodd's book on how to find people to engage with. Now we obviously use People Point, and it's much quicker and much more effective and efficient. And you're like, they're worlds away. And that technology has been growing over time and just takes away time. It gives you time back to focus on what you need to focus on. And I certainly see, and when I speak to my contemporaries, we see AI as an enabler to give you time back on things. It can't replace the profession yet. So what can you do to make yourself more effective and more efficient? When you're trying to influence people that have competing pressures and their own time pressures, AI can absolutely help you be more focused and targeted and run it at real time. You can evaluate and change and shift in quicker time, which means you can spend your time having an always-on conversation with the people you want to influence, as opposed to coming back every few months and doing something. You can have much more live conversations, and that might mean that you're targeting fewer people, and that should be a good thing, because you don't necessarily always need the massive caucus. So how can you use AI as an enabler to give you that time back and make you more focused? And then how can you use it to make sure that you've got the information at your disposal? And this is on top of my mind because I've spent the last month reading about 15 different strategies from government, and Rolls-Royce can't use ChatGPT for security reasons yet. So we're still reading these by ourselves and evaluating and analysing and monitoring, and we're not there going, can you give me the key messages of X? And actually we could save so much time and effort and giving assurance back internally into the business to say, okay, we've identified the key themes. Here are the themes and strands that are running through all these things that have come out over the past month. And here's how it links to what we're doing to achieve what we're going after longer term. Then it would be game-changing for us. And hopefully it is game-changing for companies already that are able to do that, because that means that we can continue to implement plans and having the conversation. What it ended up doing when we've got limited resources to go, right, well, we've sucked up time here. And that's time that we haven't spent going out there and talking to people. At the moment in time, we're recording this podcast in July before recess, when there's a lot of activity being crammed in now before the 22nd of July and MPs go away.
Yeah. I've lost track of the number of occasions where you've mentioned the word time there. And I think that is the real, or certainly I think it's one of the real keys for the profession is, if AI is going to give the profession back time, is how does the profession then redistribute that time? Now, does it redistribute its balance with internal stakeholders? Does it give you more time back to educate and to build coalitions, etc.? Does it give you time with external holders? Maybe it's a bit of both. But I think that's a really, really interesting dynamic for where the future's going.
And I think it's all of those, and I would add to it that it gives you time to plan. When we all talk about, seemingly, regardless of your walk of life and your profession, the thing you crave most is time to sit down and think. And I would add to your list, this will give you time to make really effective planning tools and campaigns to go out there and deliver, and therefore your influencing can be much more effective.
That's really good. Any other thoughts at all on AI or tech?
Really key rule, and this is a non-negotiable, you cannot replace your voice. So we're seeing debate, and we're all seeing this around people stress testing AI and it not quite working. But if you lose your authenticity in your voice and people start seeing through that, then because you've cut corners through AI, then you're going to lose your trust and reputation, and you're going to lose ultimately control of your own message. So AI at the moment as an enabler is fantastic, but the front end of that is your voice and your company and your brand, and you've got to protect that first and foremost. AI can't replace that. When you're influencing people in a very human, networked industry as public affairs, that authenticity still, I think, is king. That's currency.
That's really interesting. My final question on the AI stuff before we move on. Do you have a view on how MPs offices, the civil service are going to use AI? And also, I guess, how they might use AI when it comes to engaging with industry?
I'm not sure about MPs' offices. I'd be really interested to actually, if you do one podcast with a researcher, I'd be really interested to understand how MPs' offices have evolved over time. And I say that as someone who's never worked in one. When I was in Parliament, I was working for a research organisation. So I'm always fascinated to how these, and MPs, basically you've got 650 small businesses all operating in a very different way. I'd be intrigued by that. We're certainly seeing, when we talk to government, there is a way of communicating in consultation responses, in submissions that are going in, because they're going through LLMs, and these platforms are picking out keywords. You've gone to the days, I think, of civil servants reading every submission that's coming through. They're just going into a system, churning out themes and saying, I think you can already start to see it when you see consultation responses from government, and it's almost feels like it's written by AI to say, well, the question was X, and the majority of respondents said Y, and it doesn't necessarily answer the question or give you any confidence in some instances, but you're seeing actually it's taking time away from that task of civil servants and trying to understand. And so we've gone in and asked civil servants what programs they're using when consultation submissions go in, so that we can effectively identify how we get cut through in those systems. What are the key words? What are the phraseology? How do you influence that model? Because ultimately you need to differentiate yourself from just being a voice in amongst many. So going back to what we said at the start, you need to get your objective to the top of the pile, and now we've got to figure out how you crack LLMs when you're putting in submission.
Yeah, brilliant. Dan, thank you very much. A couple of questions to finish, which are going to be maybe slightly less serious. The first question you kind of answered already, but we'll cover it anyway. What would be your non-negotiable advice to someone, or for someone that's starting out in public affairs now?
Actually, I've got a couple of thoughts on that. I'll answer that one, and then a question actually, what are the non-negotiables for a company? I think it could be interesting as well. So for anyone starting out, the best lobbying is done when you believe in it. So find out which sectors interest you, what policy areas interest you, how you want to navigate the space, and go after it, and you'll have a happier time for it. I would also advocate, as you go through your career, have different experiences. Sometimes I question whether I made the right choice going into politics in the first place. I look at my colleagues in mergers and acquisitions, and it's like in the good times they're busy, in the bad times they're also busy. But actually, if you can get something that you genuinely enjoy doing and believe in it, you'll have a much better time, a much happier time. I'd also say stick to your guns and your moral identity. I was asked when I interviewed at Tesco, one of the questions was, are there any industries you wouldn't want to work in? And it was quite easy for me. I hadn't ever thought about it really, but my gut said I wouldn't want to work in these particular areas. And so now I introduce that into when I'm interviewing people and speaking to people. But I'd say have a degree of morality in your own self. That could be on the other side of morality to everyone else, but that is at least you've thought about it. So, and then my third point for individuals is be transparent, be aware, don't get caught up in, you don't want to be the front page, you don't want to be, and that's you as an individual or the organisation you're working for, right? So just be aware of the environment you're in. I've seen fewer Guido stories about researchers and public affairs professionals doing bad things, which is, maybe that's a change in the profession. That's quite nice to see. It was quite a regular appearance on Guido a few years back. And then flipping it around to a company. So I've already said use your own voice and be authentic with that. I will fight tooth and nail internally to remind any company I work for that politics is fundamentally human, and having that human connection internally and externally is key. And equally apply the transparency point. Mm-hmm. Like protect yourself, protect your company, and protect your brand. And this is possibly my favourite mantra that I've ever learned. But when I worked at Tesco, the CEO came in. It wasn't long after the horse meat scandal, and Tesco went through a transformation. And the CEO said, "You can't talk your way out of something you've behaved your way into." And when you're talking about reputational risk, public affairs as strategic counsel has a role to play in looking at the behaviour of a company and saying, do we have credibility here? And if we have credibility, we can go after what we want to go after. If we don't have credibility, we're going to lose the argument straight away. And that's before you've got to the point in which you've gone over the hill and you've hit some kind of crisis and you're not able to recover because you're using communications to get yourself out of it, not behavioural mitigation.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. Next question. What's your best or favourite party conference story or experience?
Oh, there's so many. My favourite is that, and it's really hard to argue against. It's not a story, but every time I talk about party conference internally, regardless of the organisation I've worked for, people always come back and just think that when you say you work many, many hours, and they say that's because the bars are open 24 hours. And there obviously is an element to that. But you find me an industry conference that doesn't have that. So I would always argue that it's not doing anything differently. But to be honest, you can do party conference really well just by enjoying the people that you're seeing and going around and being interested in people. That's where you get the best stuff. The best connections, and I always say that it's not quite a Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but the engagements and good times at conference are remembered, and that's really important for an industry that's pretty insular.
Absolutely. Next question: who's your favourite Prime Minister?
Oh, my political hero is Tony Blair. He was my Prime Minister growing up. And why I liked him, he changed the way we do politics. And it's maybe started with Thatcher, maybe. And I'm an 80s baby, but I obviously wasn't old enough to know the lived experience of Thatcher. But Blair changed the paradigm. And as a student of politics, that's great, and did it really well. And listening to podcasts now, and the two that I listen to most are Political Currency and Rest is Politics. And on both of them, they constantly compare back to the way Blair did politics. Maybe because it's obviously their lived experience as well, but and for that, it's a really formative time for me actually, because I was transitioning from education to career, and that doing politics that just stayed with me all the way through. I would say his biography is quite hard to get through. When you've got a chapter on Northern Ireland followed by a chapter on Kosovo, it gets quite heavy quite quickly. Other than that, he's my favourite Prime Minister.
Very good. The final question is, who's the best Prime Minister that the UK has never had?
Oh, that's a tough question. This is, I think it's a very recent experience, actually. I'm going to say Jeremy Hunt in this. He tried and obviously never made it. I could have also said Rishi, because at the time that Liz became Prime Minister, probably wasn't the moment for that kind of paradigm shift. And Rishi might have done a better job for the Tories at that point. But some very modern experiences there. But you could going back to Blair's first cabinet and look at the powerhouses there, and you could have had some amazing prime ministers. The one person who perhaps is better not as a prime minister but as a phenomenal political operator is Mandelson, who has just done incredibly well throughout his career in every role that he's done, and has done probably more to influence global politics than the majority of prime ministers.
Dan Hooper, thank you very much for joining me. It's been really, really good. Really appreciate you coming in.
Well, thanks, Dan.
Brilliant. My thanks to Dan. My thanks to our in-house producer, Ollie Foster. And most importantly, thanks to you for listening. Perhaps you have a view on the future of public affairs and would like to share it with us, or perhaps you've got some views on what you've heard on the discussion today. Please follow the link in the show's bio, which will direct you to our feedback page for Helio Intelligence, which is, of course, the home of De Havilland and Forefront.